Letter 19 of Letters from Hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Letters from Hell by Valdemar Adolph Thisted. Letter number 19. The sweeter memories are in themselves the greater their bitterness in hell. Is it not strange? Nay, it is dreadful. I am a prey to despair. Not the despair which finds an outlet in raving madness. There is life in that, but a kind of apathy which is the sister of death. Despair is one's daily bread here. It is in us. It is about us. Absorbed at times. Closing my eyes, I had almost said, but it was no use doing that here. Withdrawing within myself, however, I have the strangest fancies and imaginings. The other day I believed myself carried away into a wood. It was one of those wondrous May days when spring bursts to life not only in nature, but in the heart as well. But the delights of spring are never so pure, the human soul is never so uplifted, as in some genial forest glade. The joyful carols of the feathered songsters found an echo in my heart. I felt ready to join in their thanksgiving. The rich fragrance of the wood was about me, sinking into my soul, when suddenly I heard Lily's voice somewhere between the trees. I started, shaken out of my dreamful delight. Oh, cruelty! Where am I? There are no birds here, no woodland enchantment, no love that might call. We had taken a house one summer amid the scenery of the lake country. There were splendid woods about us. My mother had provided herself with companionship, so that I could follow my own bent whenever I chose. Often in the early morning I would take Lily for a row, landing now here, now there, to spend the day, gypsy fashion, amid the woody glens. I delighted at such times in having escaped from the world and its pleasures. What sort of renunciation that was you will readily understand. I was nowise prepared to give up the world in order to gain heaven. I merely felt nauseated with the excess, young as I was, and glad to turn my back upon it for a time, but not longing for anything better or higher. Lily, too, delighted in burying herself in nature, as she called it, and aimlessly we would wander about the livelong day, stopping where the fancy took us and proceeding again to look for other spots of enchantment. Now and then we would come upon a hut where frugal fare was obtainable, or we took with us what might satisfy simple need. Let us live like children of the wood, we said, and did so. Lily might be about 12 years at the time. My mother rather objected to our uncivilized roamings, but meeting my opposition, she contented herself with the final injunction. See what Lily does not to get too wild? Wild, sweet dove, how should she? Lily's company was as refreshing to me as the dewy fragrance of the landscape. In those genial days the graciousness of her being unfolded, and I felt a child with her. How she could laugh and chatter, delight in a nothing, and call up the echoes! How easy and free and charming was her every movement! She must look into everything, peeping now here, now there, finding surprises everywhere. Hers was a marvelous gift of understanding the little mysteries of nature. The least and most hidden escaped not her notice. Where others passed heedless, she perceived wonders. It seemed as if nature delighted in opening her sacred beauty to the pure-eyed child. The nimble deer came forth from the cover and looked at her with trustful gaze, turning and looking again as though inviting her to follow. The sly fox would quit his lair, seeking mice and beetles for his supper, untroubled by her presence, but giving her a furtive squint now and then as if to keep her in sight. The birds chirped at her merrily, or, half hiding in the leafy bowers, warbed down upon her their most gleeful song. Others running along the lichened bowl. The little squirrels, hopping from bough to bough, would follow her about the wood. Rare plants and flowers seemed to grow beneath her footstep. They were there at least whenever she looked for them. Everything enchanting her added to her charms, as the fairy of the place she appeared in, her sylph-like loveliness, with those eyes that welled over with a light touched by sadness, and that smile that spoke of sunbeams sparkling through rain. We would camp beneath some tree at times, gathering sticks and fir cones for a fire, by way of preparing for a meal. This done, I would leave Lily to her own devices, and how proud she was of her assumed dignity. We quite fastened on such occasions. Never did I enjoy grandest dinner more. I would call her my little wife, as I watched her busy contrivances, and truly all those nameless graces were hers, with which tenderest women will flit round the object of her care. Having enjoyed our gipsy meal, she would read to me, and sometimes I yielded to courting sleep. Then she would watch by me, keeping the buzzing flies from disturbing my slumbers, and on waking, the first thing I grew conscious of were those radiant stars, her faithful eyes. At other times I would read by myself, or pretend to read, listening to that mysterious rustle in the tree tops which is of distant water, and to the many sounds that break upon the stillness of the wood, making it more solemn by contrast. Lily then would roam about by herself, never unoccupied. Innumerable were the wreaths she made, and the nosegays she gathered. Or she would return rich with spoils, bringing leaves full of berries, red and ripe. But she never was out of my reach of voice. Life seemed a perfect idyll. One day we were just saying that we ought to know the woods by heart now. Having gone rather farther than usual, we came upon a little house I had cause to remember, though I had chosen to forget it, covered with clematis and roses, the charming lodge where I had met Annie. I started, horror-struck, trembling, and no doubt white as death, frightening poor little Lily dreadfully. She anxiously inquired what ailed me, but not till some minutes had elapsed had I recovered sufficiently to pretend to answer her questions, dragging her away with me hastily. What explanation I gave her I know not. I only remember that all that day I could not look her in the eyes again. How she pained me with her tender inquiries, her loving sympathy, little guessing, poor child, what a frightful memory she kept hovering about in her innocence, little thinking that the self same demon that betrayed Annie in a measure was threatening her, and that I, her friend, her only companion, was both master and slave of that demon. We continued our roamings, extending them further still, for I could not rest, but delight there was none. Poor little Lily, she had set out full of hopes of pleasures, and found nothing but dullness and dispiritedness. She was ready to sink with fatigue, but I saw it not. Toward evening a storm broke, and as we neared the lake we found it one seething mass of boiling waters. I dared not risk the child in the boat, so nothing remained but to follow the path by the shore, the distance to the house fortunately not being beyond possibilities. But Lily was tired out. The storm spirit flapped his angry wings about us. I wrapped her in a cloak, saying I would carry her home. She assured me she was able to walk, but no, I would carry her. And how light was the burden, how doubly dear! I felt as if I could walk on thus to the ends of the world. Holding her close, I went on steadily, having a couple miles before me. The stormy clouds were driving overhead, the rain kept beating about me, but I cared not, meeting force with force. How touching was Lily's anxiety lest she should prove troublesome, and, finding that I was fully bent on carrying her home, how sweetly she would set herself to repay me, whispering words of loving gratitude as if thereby to lessen the burden. I almost forgot Annie for present enchantment, but even at that time I could not shut out profaning fancy. My thoughts before long reverted to the carrying off of the Sabines in the Loggia di Lanzi at Florence. I was ashamed of the comparison, and tried to turn from it by an effort of will. So, partly to punish myself for the unworthy image, partly also to amuse Lily, I called up another picture, which I hoped was more in harmony with the occasion, the story of Christophorus carrying the Holy Child. I told Lily the legend of the powerful heathen, who, conscious of his strength, would serve none but the greatest, and who, from kings and emperors, was directed at last to Christ crucified. Seeking for him vainly the world over, he dwelt at last by the side of a tempestuous torrent, satisfied to carry pilgrims across. Years had passed, when one night he heard the calling of a child, and lifted it upon his mighty shoulder, the burden growing and growing till he nearly broke down in the river. Yet, reaching the other shore, the wonderful child said to the hoary giant, "Thou shalt be called Christophorus, for thou hast borne thy Lord." And the heathen knew him, and suffered himself to be baptized. My story had rocked Lily to sleep. Her arm was about my neck, her warm cheek resting against mine. In silence I walked along. But the legend had left an impression on my own heart. The figure of the Saviour had risen before me. I seemed conscious of his holy presence. I had not thought of him for many a day, but, buried out of sight through the faith of childhood, it had not yet died. It was welling up even now from the dark depth of my heart, followed by recollections, some bitter, some sweet, the bitter ones abounding, hiding their head in shame. What a weight of sin had I not heaped upon me in the few years of life I called mine! And the deepest guilt of all was that against Annie. The sleeping child grew heavier and heavier, but I seemed bearing a burden of sin. With uncertain footstep I staggered onward through the darksome night. The storm increased, lashing the waves and hurling them in masses of curdled foam against the rocky shore. More than once I felt water about my feet, as though the maddened lake had risen to drag me down. But on I went, heaving and panting, the cold dews breaking from every pore. It was not so much the physical powers as the strength of soul giving way. I experienced a weight of wretchedness never known before. Tortured by regret and fear, by an utter contempt, moreover, of self, I had reached for once a frame of mind that might enable me to turn upon the miserable I, and become a new creature perchance. Who knows but that I was near the blessed victory, when lo! there was light from my mother's window, appearing through the darkness and dispelling my thoughts. It was all gone, grief and regret and emotion. Would that house had been a little further, and the time gained might have defrauded hell of its prey. Cold and shivering I entered the well-lit room, leaving outside the chastened feelings that had come to me in the troubled night. And finding myself once more in the cosy chamber, I breathed with a great sense of relief. And now Lily was waking from her sleep. "What a beautiful dream!" she whispered, with half-opening eyes, as I dropped a kiss on her forehead by way of bidding her good night. They were carrying her off to bed. The following morning she told me her dream. I thought I was standing by the side of a river, and presently I saw Saint Christophorus coming towards me with the Christ child upon his shoulder. He stopped, and the child sat down by me. We played with grasses and flowers, singing songs, and I felt very happy. But the big Christophorus looked down upon us, leaning on his staff. We twined the flowers into wreaths, but the child could do more than I. It made a cross, and then a crown of thorns, putting that upon his temples. There were tiny red flowers between the stalks, hanging loosely over the forehead, and reminding one of drops of blood. And presently the Christ child said, "We will think of something else. Look me in the face. What is it you see?" I looked, and seemed to behold firstly the sower that went forth to sow, then the good Samaritan, and it was as though I heard him speak. And the next I saw the good shepherd carrying the lamb in his bosom. I dare say I might have seen more had not a question come to me. "Is it true," I asked, "that men could be so wicked as to hang thee upon the cross, piercing thy side with a spear?" "Yes," said the Christ. "See here my hands, and see my side." The marks were red as blood, and I cried bitterly. "Weep not, Lily," said he. "I do not feel it now. The love of my Father in heaven and the love of my brothers and sisters upon earth have made up for it long ago." We had been silent a while when the Christ child resumed. "Would you not like to be carried a little by this kind Christophorus? He does it so gently. Where would you like him to take you?" "Well," I said, scarcely considering, "I always had a longing for the Holy Land, but that is a long way off, and I should have to leave thee here." "No, Lily, it is not nearly so far as you think," replied the Christ, "and you and I will never part. You will find me there if you like to go." I rose, and Christophorus took me upon his shoulder, carrying me far, far away. By day he followed a bright red cloud, by night a shining star. It was the star of Bethlehem. Through many lands we went, hearing tongues I understood not, passing mountains and rivers and lakes, and going over the great sea at last. There was no land to be seen now, and the waves rose as high as mountains. I grew afraid lest we should never get through. But good Christophorus said, "Fear not, little child. I have borne my dear Lord Christ. I shall not fail to carry thee." And after many days we reached the other shore. It was the Holy Land. On he walked, with his staff in his hand, and me upon his shoulder, past Jerusalem, the white walls of which lay sparkling in the sunshine, the royal city looking as beautiful as ever she could have been in the days of yore. Further still, not far, and he stopped in a little town nestling amid her hills. Here the star stood still. It was Bethlehem. Christophorus put me down before a humble inn. The door opened, and behold, the Holy Child was there, taking me by the hand and leading me in. "There is only a manger here, little Lily, to make thee welcome. But one day, when thou art weary of life, I will take thee to a mansion above." And the Christ child drew me close, oh, so lovingly close, quite close, and kissed me. I awoke. We had just reached home. Ah, Philip, I would have liked to go on dreaming forever. "Well, little sister," I said gaily, "I think you might be satisfied. Haven't you been to Bethlehem and back, and seen no end of wonders in one short hour? What could you expect more?" "Yes," she said thoughtfully, "you are right. I ought to be satisfied till Christ bids me welcome in his mansion above." End of letter number 19. Read by Elijah Fisher.